I take it to the rooftop, can't allow to blow out. I light up in my passion for you, I swear I show out, baby. Room full of slime, take the floor out, baby. You don't like to drive, but you ride me crazy. Whipping that Mustang back on Mercedes.
All right, chat. Today we're going to talk about ADHD and sex. I've been wanting to make this video for a long time. I think a lot of times when we talk about ADHD, we talk about things like productivity, we talk about academic achievement, we talk about being able to focus and maybe do what you want to do in life. But the truth of the matter is that ADHD is a neurodevelopmental disorder. And what that means is that the brains of people with ADHD are different. And if your brain is different, the way that you engage with any activity that involves your brain is going to be different. And we don't talk enough about how ADHD specifically impacts sex. So let's get started with the first thing, which is ADHD hyperfocus courtship. So if we think about ADHD, these people tend to get into hyperfocus. They get really obsessed with things. We get a nucleus accumbens and ventral striatum that is very susceptible to dopamine. So if you're someone who's had ADHD or you've been in a relationship with someone with ADHD, what you'll notice is that falling in love feels absolutely amazing. Suddenly you're into this person. Oh my God, this person is amazing. I love spending time with them. We spend 8 hours together. We spend 10 hours together. It's so awesome. The problem is that that kind of feeling is driven by this hyperfocus dopaminergic parts of our brain. And in the same way that we get hyperfocus in a particular thing with ADHD and then never touch it again once we lose that hyperfocus, this same thing happens in relationships. So from the receiving end, it can be amazing to be the recipient of someone with ADHD's hyperfocus. They're thinking about you all the time. They're obsessing over you, but in a good way, right? They think about what you need. They're like, oh my God, you had such a hard day at work today. Let me cook you dinner. They're texting you all the time. Like, it feels amazing to be on the receiving end of this ADHD hyperfocus. And if you have this ADHD hyperfocus, that also feels amazing. You're like, oh my God, this is the one. Every interaction with them releases dopamine in your brain. So it's not just that like you like them, but you're obsessed with them. Even minor things, doing things for them are dopaminergically rewarding, and it feels wonderful, right? If you have ADHD, you know how luxurious and awesome hyperfocus feels, because your mind is finally focused. Instead of being distracted by a million things, you're like into this thing, and it feels so good to be into this thing. The problem is that the ADHD-induced hyperfocus, if that forms the foundation of the relationship, when the hyperfocus ends, both partners are left in a lurch. It can feel kind of like a bait and switch, where suddenly this person is like, you were texting me all the time, now you're ghosting me completely. And from the perspective of the ADHD person, they no longer have the benefit of the extra dopamine that they get from the thrill of the chase. When I work with my patients, what this sort of feels like is I was super into them, but I don't know what happened. The spark just disappeared. So when we're talking about the spark in a relationship, that is oftentimes driven by our dopaminergic circuitry, which will gradually decline over time. The first time you play a video game, there's a burst of dopamine, but if you play that game every single day, it's not going to give you that same burst. And so what do we do about this? This is where I want y'all to understand that if a particular part of your brain dictates this relationship, the reason I'm in this relationship is because one part of my brain is hyperactive. What that means is that the moment that that part of our brain becomes deactivated, then my lust for the relationship, no pun intended, will also disappear. So this is why it's important, if you have ADHD and you're dating someone, to actually scale back from that hyperfocus. So if we sort of give into those parts, like I want to text you every day, I want to text you every day, I want to text you every day, some part of your brain is telling you to text them every day. And if you give into that, what you are doing is listening to your brain. And if you are listening to your brain, when your brain tells you not to do something, you will listen to that too. So oddly enough, what I tell people who fall into these relationships way too quickly is to slow it down. Don't listen to it. I know it's super exciting. I know you love it a lot. I know there's the thrill of the chase. But if you want this relationship to last, you've got to slow it down. So the way that I sort of think about it is there is a certain amount of dopaminergic thrill that you get from this relationship. Do you want to blow your load all at once? Right? Do you want to spend all of your thrill right up front? And then generally speaking, what we right? Do you want to get from this relationship? Do you want to blow your load all at once? Right? Do you want to spend all of your thrill right up front? And then generally speaking, what we see in healthy relationships is when we sort of conserve some of that thrill to get us through into 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, 6 months. And this is when other pillars of the relationship will start to form. Once those pillars are formed, we will hopefully end up with a setup that will lead to a healthy relationship. The second thing that a lot of people don't understand is something called tactile defensiveness. Now remember, ADHD is a neurodevelopmental disorder, which means that it alters the way that our brain works. And one of the key things that we're discovering more and more about is that ADHD alters our perception of physical stimuli. So it's not just sounds and sights and things like that, but the way that things feel in our mouth. So a lot of times, you know, people with ADHD will be very sensitive to particular textures, and also the way that things feel in our body. So people with ADHD may be very, very sensitive to things like swings and stuff like that, like in a good way. Moving your body becomes really, really important for maintaining your focus. So if you tell a kid with ADHD to sit still, it becomes really, really hard for them. Now, normally when we think about ADHD, we think about things like sitting still in class. But this actually enters the realm of sexual relationship as well as something called tactile defensiveness. This is where particular ways that we get touched may trigger responses that are different from neurotypical people. So for a neurotypical person, you know, the way that they will touch you, they touch you that way because when someone touches them that way, their brain interprets that touch in a pleasant way. But oftentimes what people with ADHD will experience is like a lot of touch will feel ticklish. People will feel like super, super hypersensitive, especially around erogenous zones, or the touch can even be perceived by your brain as aggressive. So instead of feeling comforted by a touch, your brain like kind of locks up. It's like, oh, we're being attacked. And this is because generally speaking, there's a gating problem in the brain. What that means is that the way that our brain gates stimuli, so when I get a stimulus, my brain will sort of like lower it down a little bit or even block it, and that gating function is impaired in ADHD. What this practically looks like is a bewildering amount of like sensitivity to touch. So the moment that you understand that tactile defensiveness is an issue, that even though your partner is touching you in a particular way, or if you're dating someone with ADHD, if you're touching them in a particular way and they don't respond in the right way, be aware of this principle. What the practical way to deal with this is just to have a lot of communication, a lot of dialogue, and don't take things personally when there is a loving touch that is given that is not received in a loving way. Now, the third thing is incredibly fascinating. So if you're struggling to have sex in a relationship, if the intimacy in your relationship is gone, if there's sort of a dead bedroom syndrome and there's ADHD at play, this is true of non-ADHD as well, the culprit could be household chores. So this is what's wild, okay? So in a survey, 56% of people said that I would feel sexier if my ADHD partner helped me out more at home. The Pew Center did a research survey on American adults that basically found that the most important thing in a relationship is faithfulness. The second most important thing in a relationship is healthy, satisfying sexual activity. The third most important thing in a relationship is actually sharing household chores. This is more important than income, more important than looks. So all these like social media influencers out there who are telling you to be an alpha by like making more money and getting super sexy and going to the gym, that's actually not what the data shows. So I know this sounds really insane, but like I want y'all to think for a second about what you see on the internet. How much of what you see on the internet is based on actual science or research? Very little. What determines whether something propagates on the internet is the emotional engagement it gets, which if you like stop and think about it for a second, is the very opposite of science. Like real science can be very exciting, but oftentimes it involves a lot of methods, a lot of data analysis, a lot of really drab and dreary stuff. Before y'all take issue with me telling you to be a beta cuck and start to like help your wife out with chores, let's take a quick look at what the experience of this is like from someone. So this is from a wonderful qualitative research paper. It seems the loss of intimacy in the non-physical sense is almost universal among us, and that often leads to the physical loss of intimacy as well. It's pretty much impossible to feel close with a spouse when ADHD problems create a wall that blocks the way. For some of us, the wall is a control battle for a clean,
this nigga's a doc, this nigga's a licensed physician.
Against our ADHD partner's addictions or obsessions du jour, financial jeopardy, irritability, substance use, thoughtless words or deeds, unreliability, or various other issues. It doesn't seem to make a heck of a lot of difference what specific wall is there. A wall defeats intimacy every time. Now, what does this mean? Practically, what's going on is if we look at the way in which intimacy forms, in order to become aroused, we need activation of the parasympathetic nervous system. The parasympathetic nervous system is our rest and relaxation kind of system. So oftentimes when I'm working with patients who have newborns and they kind of have dead bedroom and they have young kids, not just newborns, but 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds, 7-year-olds, the rate of sexual activity declines. Now, why is that? This is really because of the physiology of sex. So
you don't want to say it.
Sex when we have only because of the rate of sexual activity declines. Now, why 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds, 7-year-olds, the rate of sexual activity declines. Now, why is that? This is really because of the physiology of sex. So we tend to have sex when we have a lot of like relaxation. We feel pretty good. Like if you're well rested, you're on vacation. If you're exhausted, what happens when you get into bed? You hit the bed, you don't feel like having sex, you kind of pass out, especially if you're a woman. And this is where there are some biological differences. So if we sort of think about the cost of sex for a man, it's like 3 to 8 minutes of pleasure. And then like tomorrow rolls around, my energy level is totally the same. But from a biological perspective, what is the cost of a sexual act for a woman? It's potentially 9 months of pregnancy, a lot of energy investment, a lot of child rearing investment. So these things are viewed somewhat differently on a biological level. Now, that doesn't mean I don't want you guys to interpret this, like over extrapolate this into like women don't like having sex. That's not what it is. This is just a broad strokes biological kind of thing. What we do know for both genders is that parasympathetic activity or relaxation is the first step to arousal. Now, once we start to feel aroused, then our sympathetic nervous system kicks in. This is the part of our nervous system that increases our adrenaline, increases blood flow, leads to erections in the penis, leads to clitoral engorgement, which also happens when women are sexually aroused, which if you're wondering like why you can't just jump to, engaging with the clitoris with fingers, mouth, whatever, and why women like may be turned off from that, it's because actually women need a certain amount of clitoral engorgement from increased blood flow that comes from the parasympathetic nervous system to prime those nerves to make it actually feel like it's pleasurable. So practically what this looks like is, when I have patients who have ADHD, they're in a high stress state. You come home, there's dishes in the sink, the trash is overflowing, we've got to pay these bills, we've got to pick up this thing, your kid needs this kind of birthday gift. So there's just so much overwhelming work. And by the way, 96% of people who are in relationships with people with ADHD also feel like their partner is a burden to them in some way. And 92% of people in relationships with people with ADHD also feel like they have to compensate for the lack of organizational contributions from their partner. So what this practically means is that if your house is a mess, if your shit isn't taken care of, you will be in a high stress state. Once you're in a high stress state, the circuitry that makes you aroused gets disabled. And this is why it's crazy, but like the most arousing thing you can do for your girlfriend or wife is actually housework, and there's a physiological chain for that. The problem is in today's world, everyone's like, oh yeah, I ain't gonna do housework, like I ain't gonna be a beta cock. We have these very traditional gender roles, and if that's the kind of relationship you want and your partner sort of wants that, and by the way, that relationship also works because usually in that classic traditional gender role relationship, the wife or the woman of the household has somewhere between 40 and 60 hours to take care of household work. They don't have a job. So hopefully that's sufficient. In today's world, when we have double income households, women will get absolutely crushed. Now, I know a lot of dudes out there will be like really upset by what I'm saying right now, but this is literally the science, right? This is how physiology works. This is how sexual arousal works. We have survey level data that also shows that doing household chores is one of the sexiest things that you can do. And why is that? Once the stress level goes down, we can activate the parasympathetic nervous system. Once the parasympathetic nervous system kicks in, then we will start to feel more aroused. We'll have opportunities for connection, etc. The last thing that we're going to talk about is ADHD-induced hypersexuality and hyposexuality. Oftentimes, people with ADHD experience a certain amount of hypersexuality. This has been associated with things like inattention and impulsivity. So if you sort of think about, your sexual desires, what are they? They're particular impulses. So if I'm not, if I'm sort of sitting around and I'm like, let's say I'm walking down the street and I see someone walk by and I start to have like a sexual impulse. Oh my God, that person is so hot. Man, I would like to, XYZ. So if you sort of think about the way that we get aroused, sometimes we get aroused through sensory stimuli and arousal, like I'm sitting here doing my work and now I'm feeling frisky. Let me go ahead and approach my partner and try to engage in some sexual activity. That's basically an impulse. So a lot of the hypersexuality that we see is a function of how sensory sensory we are, how susceptible to sensory stimuli we are, as well as how impulsive we are. The other aspect of hypersexuality that we see a lot, especially with like compulsive behavior and ADHD, is that sex can be used as a form of emotional regulation. And remember that people with ADHD, their negative emotional circuitry is more jittery. It experiences negative emotion more intensely, more quickly, and for a longer period of time. The problem with ADHD is that we oftentimes have difficulty engaging in alternate emotional regulation activities. So if I have a neurotypical patient, I tell them, if you're feeling stressed or anxious, meditate. Meditate for 20 to 30 minutes. Do this breathing exercise, and then you will feel better, right? That's what we'll sort of say. But if you're someone who's got ADHD, it can sometimes be hard to remember that you should meditate. It can be hard to even realize that you're feeling anxious. And the ability to engage in meditation, which involves sitting your ass down in a chair for 20 to 30 minutes at a time, is really hard to do. So oftentimes what I see in my patients is that they will default to regulating their emotions and managing their sex through sexual activity. The last thing that we also know is that hypersexuality is actually very tightly correlated with self-concept and self-esteem. The worse your self-concept is, the worse your self-esteem is, the more likely you are to engage in hypersexual behavior. If I don't feel content about myself, if I don't feel great about myself, one of the best things that I can do is engage in sexual activity, because then I feel connected, then I feel good. I get this rush of vasopressin, oxytocin. I feel connected to this other human being. I feel seen. I can pleasure them in some way, which helps me feel really good. And, you know, if you sort of look at like alpha males on the internet, providing sexual pleasure with their very, very big penises is one of the best ways that they feel better about themselves, right? I've got a big, I'm a sexual messiah. That makes me a great human being. So there's a lot about self-concept and sexual activity.
Bro,
the last thing to keep in mind is that if you grow up with ADHD that is undertreated, which is probably the case, we see a causal risk between growing up with ADHD and being depressed. So oftentimes what I sort of think about every time I have a patient who comes into my office, if they come in and they have a diagnosis of ADHD, I assume they have a mood disorder like major depressive disorder until proven otherwise. Growing up with ADHD just means that there's a very high risk of developing depression later in life. Now, last thing that's very bewildering for many people is that not only will they be hypersexual, they will also be hyposexual. Now, why is this? So hyposexuality and ADHD has to do with a number of different things. The first aspect is emotional regulation and the jitteriness of our amygdala. We talked already about stress. So that whole mechanism is at play. If you're someone who's got ADHD and you have an assignment coming up a week from now that's due, your mind is going to be so occupied by that, so stressed out about that, that you can't think about anything else. And the really frustrating thing is not only can you not think about anything else, you can't even do the work and be done with it, because you have to wait until last minute panic in order to induce your motivational system to actually like write that paper or study for that exam or whatever, right? So there's a very high stress state that we live in that leads to hyposexuality. The other mechanism that's important for hyposexuality is that usually getting aroused involves a chain of events, right? So I start by being relaxed. I start by sort of having my parasympathetic nervous system active. I'm not stressed out. I'm sort of somewhat rested. And then there's some amount of touching. There's some amount of like, maybe I'm like touching you a little bit. Maybe you're touching me a little bit. Then maybe we're kissing a little bit. And then maybe there's some heavy petting. And then we sort of have this graduated response of like moving from A to Z. This is what we sometimes call foreplay. When I have patients with ADHD, it's crazy. Like their partners will say like, you know, they don't understand that I'm trying to seduce them. They're so distractible. Like someone else can be like hitting on them, rubbing their shoulders, whatever, like giving them a kiss, like rubbing breasts up against their face and things like that. And the person with ADHD is like, I'm trying to figure out why Minesweeper doesn't have a newer version that someone has released on Steam. So there's basically a chain of attention which you have to maintain in order to move from initial like sexual overtures to the completion of the sexual act. And that chain,
they'd be like, oh my God, what's your name? I'd be like, blah, blah, what's yours? And I'm like, damn. BO7 season 1 just dropped, bro. I really pay for that shit, bro.
of attention can be sometimes very hard to maintain in ADHD, which leads to a sense of hyposexuality. So in my experience as a clinician, the more that I equip my patients with this kind of understanding, this isn't necessarily like a clinical intervention. This is just, hey, your brain is different, and that's going to impact every part of your life.
he does drink. I was so confused.
Man, it's hard to be a dude on the internet nowadays. So many of us are lonely, sexually frustrated, and disrespected because we can't find a girlfriend or can't get laid. And so we try so hard to find a girlfriend because we look at our lives.
Bro, I was like, who is we? But I read the title
We're
again.
sad, we're lonely, we're sexually frustrated, and we see these other people
Bro, I still don't see
who
it.
are surrounded by beautiful women in beautiful places, having lots of fun or sexy, amazing, and we want that too. We see all the smiles, we see all the sexiness, and we think to ourselves, that life is way better than mine. And the way for me to go from here, sad, lonely, sexually frustrated, to there is to get a girlfriend. But it's not only dudes that tell us this, it's also women, usually on places like Instagram, who are relatively
I thought he was going to say a yacht.
attractive, trying to make it as an influencer, and they're more than happy to shit on us when we do not fit that mold. And this is what you may say, but that's just on the internet. The real world is a different place. Unfortunately, we live in a society that values a man based on their ability to engage in romantic relationships, right? A dude who, like myself, I'm not trying to flex here, but I'm 42 years old. I'm hopefully happily married, and I've got 2 kids. And when people look at me, they think I'm normal.
Yep, Dr. Kanosia.
Oh my God, that needs to be edited out. Unfortunately, the real world treats men who are single like, if you're a virgin, you don't have a girlfriend, you're not married, and you're 25, 30, 35, 40, people are going to start treating you like a creep, even if you just walk across the street and you watch some kids playing because it reminds you of the joy of your childhood. Someone's going to call the cops because they think you're a pedophile, right? Single dude who's 42, labeled a pedophile, whether you are or not. Unfortunately, we live in a world that places your status, your worth as a man, based on the kinds of women that you can surround yourself with. And this is something that I was shocked to discover in my own life. So when I got married in my first year of medical school. And then like this really hit when I was in residency. And like, you know, I was in the hospital. I had a ring on my finger, and I had kids even, and like people, like the women, the nurses especially, but also some of the doctors in the hospital started treating me really differently. I got all kinds of female attention. And at first I was like, okay, maybe they're just being friendly, which I think is absolutely the case, right? So I think that when I would bring my 1-year-old daughter to work and all of the nurses who were predominantly women were gushing over my daughter, you know, it's so awkward. Like if you're a dude, if you're a male nurse and there's a male doctor and the male doctor brings in their 1-year-old kid, are you allowed to be overjoyed, start cooing and awing, oh, can I hold him? Aren't you precious? Aren't you adorable? Which is what's really scary is like, I feel that way when I see a 1-year-old. I just love all kids now. Like ever since I've had my own kids, I appreciate kids. Kids are just so damn cute. And it reminds me of when my kids were 1-year-old. But you can't do that as a dude. As I started demonstrating to other women that maybe I was safe, I noticed that their attention towards me changed. They started touching me more. And I do think that some of that was not necessarily romantic or sexual in nature. I think they just genuinely thought like, okay, here is a good guy, right? Here is a safe guy. Because a lot of women have terrible experiences with sexual predation, assault, etc., unsolicited pics from men. So one of the ways that I think a lot of women feel like a guy is safe is if he is happily married and has kids, or has a stable girlfriend and has kids, or has a boyfriend and has kids. That shows that this person is safe.
This nigga's
so a
living
lot of the
room?
ways that we get judged as men, are we safe or creeps, depends on our status with women. And we live in this weird paradoxical society where women basically get shamed for the number of sexual partners they have, and men get shamed for the lack of sexual partners they have.
Nah,
and so what's really
they
scary
should both
about
get
this
shamed
is as we
for the
sort
same
of
reason.
are living in this world where if you're a dude, you are going to
Equality.
be judged based on your capacity to find a partner, because a partner indicates a certain degree of safety and normality. And so as we strive for this, right, as we are judged for being virgins, being losers, being creeps, we look for answers. And this is where social media offers a ton. Be a high value man. Be over 6 feet tall, make $100,000 a year, be in the top 10%, be in the top 15%, and then women will flock to you. This is not just about dealing with loneliness and sexual frustration. This is about being seen as a human, not a cretin, not a creep, not a pedophile. This is what you need to do. This is what I want y'all to understand. If you cannot become 6 feet, if you cannot make $100,000 a year, if you can't have a big, if you are not able to have these things, you will not be able to find a girlfriend. And if you cannot find a girlfriend, people in the world will not treat you as a human. They will treat you as a predator. So it's not just that I'm seeing this in my personal life. This is something, unfortunately, we've been seeing way more in our coaching program, where people are coming to us with this situation of like, I'm single, I'm alone, I have a lot of negative emotions, I don't know how to get started, I'm dealing with a lot of rejection, there's a lot of technology addiction. And we've had a ton of experience of helping people like this. So finding a girlfriend for men is not an issue of relieving sexual frustration. It is an issue of being accepted by society. But the problem is that this formula doesn't work. There are plenty of men out there that have done what they're supposed to do, including being born with good genetics and being over 6 feet tall in adulthood. They've done what they're supposed to do, and yet they wake up one day and they find that this is not enough. And then some people have sort of figured this out, right? So we have a clip like this where someone says, okay, what's missing is effort, right? You need to put in more effort. But that too kind of rubs me the wrong way, because most of the men that I work with who are single, virgins, and or had a single traumatic relationship a few years ago, but have been single since then, they're not a virgin anymore. Most of these people are putting in a ton of effort. Like, this is what blows my mind, is I think most of the people who are single in the world today are putting in way more effort than people who are partnered. And we see this all the time with like people talking about their dependent partners, right? These women who are dating man children who won't even like clean the dishes or expect their girlfriend to cook for them, clean for them, pay the bills, and be sexually available to them whenever they feel like it. I think actually the single people are working way harder than the partnered people. So the question is, okay, like, what do we do about this, right? So if you're someone who is struggling to find a girlfriend, if you are seen as less than human because you can't find an appropriate partner.
As in, like, that would fix the problem, not as in I do that. I don't do that.
If you don't have that badge of I'm a normal human, I'm a safe person to be around, how do you handle this? And this is where we can look at some of the success stories. So granted, this is Twitter and someone is just simply asking, you know, how did you meet your other half? For people who are actually in relationships, how did y'all actually meet? And we see that my wife dialed the wrong number, and I can't remember why we agreed to meet the next day, but 27 years and 3 kids later, still going strong. I literally manifested this relationship. I walked into a random mall in Baltimore City and said to myself, I might just meet the love of my life. Ran into this guy, and we've been tight ever since. Met on a dating app, right? So we do sometimes meet people on dating apps. We had one video chat, and I was smitten, right? So there's this sort of love at first sight kind of thing. Performing in Atlanta with my bestie. He was a producer and an engineer. So we see that sometimes people meet in professional relationships. Shot me a DM on here for tacos, but timing wasn't right, and she was over me. Months passed, and I asked her to go get tacos. She pulled up in sweats and no makeup. The date ended up lasting 5 hours and a lot of us talking and laughing, and I never looked back. We met on Tinder with no intention to date, just having fun. We ended up falling in love after a month of dating. She was a Lyft passenger. Oh my goodness. This sounds super creepy, right? But we connected. Can you imagine your Lyft passenger hitting on you, dude? This is my favorite. Congrats. Happy for you. As a psychiatrist, when I look at these, I start to sense something in the ether. I'm detecting a lot of green flags. And this is what actually the research on formation of relationships actually backs up, is that relationships involve a lot of things that we can't see on the internet. The internet is really good at showing us particular things. An internet can show us attractiveness, but can not show us genuineness. The internet can show us sexiness, but cannot show love, right? The internet can show symbols of romance, like fancy flowers or an extravagant gift, but can't show like respect. And this is what becomes so hard if you're a dude who's trying to figure out, how do I find a girlfriend? Because people will say you have to put in effort. What does that mean? People will say, don't be creepy. People will say, be natural. But the internet never shows us natural, right? And then we also have examples of people who are like, we met for the first time, we hung out for 5 hours, and it was like the best day of my life. Oh, we followed each other for years on Twitter, but then when we finally met up, we hung out every day. If this dude
wasn't married, he'd be trauma dumping,
bro. This is the key thing that I want y'all to notice. All of these relationships demonstrate reciprocity, where one person is matching the other person's energy. But what do we hear on the internet? We actually hear lots of examples of always do things one way. Wait 24 hours before you text her back. Wait 24 hours. Make him wait for you. Don't respond to him right away. Don't put out on the first date or else this will happen, right? This is where like everyone is giving us this stock advice.
And then they do it every time, bro.
But really, I think what the science really shows is that we want to be reciprocal. Like the first date that I had with my wife, we hung out for 10 hours. Like it was wild. And if I had followed some stupid internet advice back then, who knows if I would be in the relationship that I'm in right now. So this is where we got to be careful about some of this advice, because the basic problem with internet advice is that it's generic. It does not fit to a particular, person. And we'll get more to that. But what I see here, and I think this is also now I'm going to offer generic advice, is be reciprocal, right? So give and take. And this is what I see so much, is that a lot of times when we see these horror stories on the internet, these terrible text exchanges, what do we see in these terrible text exchanges? A lack of reciprocity. You send one text, they explode in your face with walls and walls and walls of text. You think you're a nice guy, but really what you're doing is trauma dumping, right? You're not matching the energy at all. And this is what's really fascinating. Matching people's energy is how you get them to feel safe, comfortable, and like you. And I'll give y'all a beautiful example of this. One time when I was a second-year resident working overnight in the emergency room at the Massachusetts General Hospital and Harvard Medical School, I sat with a patient and I wasn't sure if they were a patient with depression with psychotic features. So sometimes depression can get so bad where the negative self-talk can literally turn into auditory hallucinations. It is a voice telling you, you hear it in an auditory way, all of these negative all of these negative self-thoughts, which actually turn into like literally auditory hallucinations. Or whether this person has something called schizoaffective disorder with depressed mood. So in schizoaffective disorder, this is basically someone who has a primary diagnosis of schizophrenia. So this is a diagnosis that's characterized by delusions, paranoia, auditory hallucinations, right? This is what we call psychosis. But then they get depressed on top of that. So the problem is that both patients are both depressed and hallucinating. So how can you tell which one comes first? Is this hallucination a result of the depression, or is this depression layered on top of the hallucination? So I went to my attending, and my attending asked me a brilliant question. They asked me, imagine you're on a subway, and the subway is full. This person is sitting down on the subway, and there's one seat open, only one seat open next to this person. You feel like sitting down. Your legs are tired. Would you sit down next to them? If the answer is yes, they have depression with psychotic features. If the answer is no, they have schizoaffective disorder with depressed mood. Okay, so this is what they explained to me. And I was like, I would not sit down next to this person. They just feel creepy. And here's what happens in schizophrenia. In schizophrenia or schizoaffective disorder, it doesn't just create paranoia or delusions. It also severely interferes with our affective or emotional circuitry. These people have something called blunted affect. So they won't smile super big. They won't cry very loud. They just have a very neutral expression. And I don't know if this kind of makes sense, but if I like right now when I'm talking to y'all, hopefully y'all are engaged, but if I start going like this, like, how would you feel about me? Would you want to date me? I love you so much. I want to spend the rest of my life with you. I really can't wait to kiss you and touch you in all of the places that you like. Creepy. Like even when I do it, I'm laughing a little bit on the inside, so that's a little bit less creepy. But do y'all see how when someone has a blunted affect, they can't be reciprocal? And what I see so much on the internet is a lack of being reciprocal. So either we overinvest and chase people too much, Or they will ask a question that is relatively genuine and we respond to it with a profound amount of anger. The second thing is that relationships need to be organic. Now, this is also really hard because if I tell you, oh my God, successful relationships are organic, your first question is going to be, how the hell do I be organic? Because people will tell you on the internet, be natural, be organic, be loose. What does that mean? So this is something where we can dive into it. This is so cool, okay? So what does not being natural look like? And this is where, from like a psychiatric perspective, the more that you bring into the relationship or interaction, because these aren't even relationships yet, the less organic it will be. So if I show up on a first date, but I have a ton of emotional baggage, if I've been going down the social media rabbit hole and I think all women are bitches and I'm just itching, I have all these thoughts in my head and I am projecting all of what I've seen onto the internet onto an actual human being, that relationship will not be natural. That will not be organic. What does natural mean? Natural means that I offer something and you give something in return. There is a natural, reciprocal, organic exchange. What makes these exchanges hard? When you have a lot of stuff in your head that you are layering on to this person's actions. When this person doesn't respond to your texts in time, they don't respond to you for 24 hours, that means they're playing hard to get. That means they're texting other people. Do you see how you can inject a lot of meaning into benign interactions? Whereas if you wipe all of that stuff out of your mind and then you sort of receive what this person offers without a filter, that is what becomes a natural interaction. So basically, a natural interaction is like, I send one tennis ball over to your side of the court, you send one tennis ball back. But what we tend to find is I send one tennis ball, you read into it way too much, and then you send 15 tennis balls back. And we've seen this time and time and time again. Now, this is really hard because in our current society, as we spend a lot of time on dating sites and things like that, dating apps, we will build up so much resentment that the only place it has to go out is to be projected on the poor, unlucky person who happened to match with you. The opposite is also true, and if y'all are using dating apps, you've probably seen this, where you are the poor, unlucky recipient of this person's overwhelming projection and emotional baggage. The other really scary piece of evidence, I mean, this isn't really evidence, this is anecdotal based on my clinical practice that I've seen, is I've seen healthy relationships get injected with social media-based ideas. I've worked with women whose husbands have started, following particular alpha male red pill kind of influencers. It's drastically changed the way that they behave in their interactions with their wife. This is, in some cases, tragic cases led to divorce. And I'm scared to say that this is happening at an increasing frequency. And it's not just this happening to men. I've also had a fair number of dudes. These are actually more personal relationships whose wives, these are actually married men, have started going down social media rabbit holes around particular ideas of what women are entitled to and things like that. And they actually had a healthy relationship with 2 kids. And then their wife starts to get all of these ideas about like, oh, I shouldn't be working and I should do this. And like, you should be taking care of me. And like, you should be doing the diapers. And you should be working, and you should be helping me clean the house. And like they go down this rabbit hole, and then suddenly their natural organic interactions, which have been present for 15 years, get injected with this other layer of stuff. And that will actually lead them to divorce too. I've seen it way too often. So now the question is, okay, so if we want to be reciprocal and we want to be organic, we want to be natural, how do we actually do that? Right? How do we come across as not creepy, especially because we're going to be judged for being single in the first place? 2 major things that I'm going to share with y'all. The first is we have to work with anger. So this is what's really interesting. A lot of people will wonder, why are men so angry all the time, right? We look at men, we're like, oh, men are so angry. Men are so angry. They need to do something with their anger. Like, that's bad. Men are angry. Anger is predators. Like, men are predators. Men are angry. And it's okay to feel your emotions, right? Men should express their emotions, except for anger. That one's off the table. No, if you express anger, you become a predator. So why are men so angry? So we have to understand what the evolutionary purpose of our emotions is. When human beings in general, when things aren't going well for us and we need help, The primary emotion that we experience is sadness. No, it sounds kind of weird, but let's think about sadness. Sadness is the most visible emotion, right? It is something that you can see when someone's crying. You can see it from far away. You can hear it. It's loud. Their nose is blubbering. Their tears are going. Like, you can tell when someone is crying. So if we look at sadness, sadness is an emotion that is designed, evolutionary, to recruit aid from outside of you. Oh yeah, I'm sad, I'm crying, my boyfriend or girlfriend just dumped me. And what happens? Hopefully your friends show up and they're like, okay, like, bro, okay, girl, like, let's go out, like, let's take care of you. It's gonna be okay. It's a signal for help. Unfortunately, we live in a world where if you're a dude and you cry, unless you are a superhero who is shedding a calculated amount of tears and then takes action into your own hands, sadness is not really acceptable. A lot of men, a tragic number of men that I've worked with, when they express sadness, and it's okay to cry once, like, oh my God, he's crying, he's so sensitive. But try crying every day for 6 months. Like, see how people treat you then. And so if the signal that we send out to get help, hey, I'm crying because I'm lonely, I'm a loser, I'm a virgin. I feel so lonely and I don't. What is the world's response? Bruh, you're not entitled to shit, bruh. Come on, bruh. What, you expect women to solve this problem for you too? We're expected to do your dishes, wipe your ass, take care of your kids, and you want our help in getting laid? You're not entitled to shit, bro. I'm not saying that that's right or wrong. I'm simply pointing out this is the common experience that people go through today. And so if sadness doesn't work, then what is the human brain left with? So we turn to another emotion, anger. Anger is the emotion that prompts action, right? When we feel sad, we literally feel like doing nothing. It is an emotion that induces a lack of motivation and signals for help. I can't do this on my own. I need your help, right? Help me do this thing. Anger is the emotion that does the exact opposite. It motivates us towards action even when we shouldn't act. So when someone gets really pissed, what do your friends usually do? Oh, calm down, bro. Don't go into that office. Don't start yelling at your professor. Don't start yelling at your boss. Don't break up with her yet, bro. Like, take a deep breath. Don't act. Like calm down and then act. Anger induces action. And so what we see.
Don't break up with her yet, bro. I've never heard that shit yet.
I see this in so many of my male patients where sadness doesn't work, and the only option they have to bring themselves out of it is anger. Because when we get angry, then we don't care how many people we're up against. Anger is the one emotion that allows us to face all kinds of odds and act anyway. So until we allow men to feel sad or be sad, we're going to end up with men who are incredibly angry. Now, why does this matter for you? Because if you are engaging with a woman or a man, whatever, and you're trying to engage in a relationship, if you have a certain amount of sadness that has been transmuted to anger and you are coming to this relationship with a lot of anger, reciprocity is going to be incredibly difficult, if not impossible. Right? Because they send you something, you have so much suppressed anger that kind of comes out. So you must deal with this anger by, first of all, asking yourself what you're really sad about and sitting with that some. We've got a lot of resources around emotional regulation and stuff like that. Y'all should check out. We have a whole series of lectures about it. Definitely check that out. Second thing is about being natural. So the more that we project into the relationship, the less that we treat this person like a person, and the more that we treat them like a representative, an embodiment of the ideas that social media teaches us, the harder of a time we're going to have. Because we're not responding to a human being. We are responding to a projection of a human being. Now, we're going to talk for a second, if you guys want to understand how do I deal with that, Dr. K, we have to understand projection. So if you look at a lot of the alpha male red pill kind of people, what they'll say is that, you know, women are transactional. They're just looking for this. They're looking for the most high value male, right? Women are like basically incapable of like real love. The kind of love that women used to represent before feminism, right? Before feminism like ruined all the women. Man, it's so sad. They were really there and they were really good and stable partners. Those women were capable of love in the 1950s. But the women today, man, they're just not capable of being partners the way that they used to be. This is projection. So let's understand how projection works. Projection is when I have a feeling that I do not like and is too much for me to hold. I'm going to take that feeling and I'm going to project it out and I'm going to put it on you. And then I can blame you for it. So what is that feeling, Dr. K? What does that mean? If I feel unlovable, if I feel like a reject, if I feel like a loser. So if I'm unlovable, then no one will love me, right? Makes sense. If I'm unlovable, then no one will love me. But that's really hard to sit with, this core idea that I am unlovable. Oh my God, it's so psychologically painful. So instead what I do, I take my unlovability and then I say, you are not capable of love. You see what I did there? Little bait and switch? Oh yeah, I am unlovable. You do not love me. There is no love here, but it's my fault. But instead what I can do something super cool. I can take that I'm not unlovable and I can say, oh, you're not capable of love. That's why there's no love in the relationship. It's not my problem. It is your problem. This is projection. And what I found in literally 100% of the red pillars that I have worked with is a traumatic experience around love where they feel fundamentally unlovable at the end of that experience. They get left for somebody else. Oh yeah, I'm not capable of being, I'm unlovable because she left me for someone else. So common. I'm talking about 100%. Clinical practice, right? So anecdotal. So just my practice, maybe there's a selection bias, but I see this in 100% of red pillars that I've worked with. So if you want to start to be natural, if you want to start to not inject this kind of stuff, you need to look at all of the things that you see that are problematic in women and try to think about, okay, this person is a bitch, this person just wants money, and then start to ask yourself, am I a little bit of an asshole? Am I afraid? Holy crap, the number of men who say yes to this question when they end up in my office. Am I afraid that I won't be able to make enough money? Oh my God, the answer to that question is yes. And if they're afraid that they won't be able to live up to expectations, they're going to project that out. So if you're a dude who's struggling to find a girlfriend, things are way more complicated. And I'm sorry to say that you guys probably know this. It's not as simple as 6 feet, 100K, and a big dick, which, by the way, a big dick isn't nearly as important as we think it is.
I don't think you know how big 12 inches is.
Instead, focus on reciprocity and being natural.